All right, let's talk about standard out. What is standard out? You can see I'm using this name right here. Standard out, which we pronounce standard out. Standard out is the output stream for the operating system from any program to the operating system. Now, output stream might seem a little abstract. All we're talking about is where output goes from a program. We've seen this every time we printed because the default destination for any standard out message is to the screen. Anytime we've printed in our program, it's gone to the screen. We can see this right now. Just call this program Now, you see in the terminal window that the program is writing to the screen, and that's just been taken for granted. Just when you want to print, then we see it on the screen. And I want to be crystal clear that although this terminal window is shown inside PyCharm, really we can go to any terminal window. This would be the terminal program in Mac, or on Windows it's known as command prompt. And if you want to go to the command prompt, you would go to the search box on Windows and type CMD, and you'll see command prompt. You can open up one of those. Now, I happen to be in the same directory as my project, and that's going to be important. I wanted to show you that I can just as easily run this script from any command prompt, really. There's the same output as we saw when we ran in terminal window. In fact, this terminal window and this terminal window are functionally exactly the same. It's just that PyCharm is just providing us a nice clean interface, or a clean view, very PyCharmy sort of view into the terminal window, but they're just the same. Now, this standard out stream is going from our program to the operating system, and the operating system is feeding it to the screen. It just should be understood that this standard out is not unique to Python by any means. Any program writes to standard out, or many programs do. For example, we might make use of a command line utility called ls. On the Windows operating system, this program is called dir. So why don't we try that right now? I'll type ls here. If you're on Windows, though, you should type dir. Now, since we're in this project directory with ls or dir, if you, and obviously in order to do this, you would need to open up this same folder, project folder that I'm using for these videos, which I will make available on the website. You'll see this list of files. Alternatively, you don't even need to be in this project. You can just do this with any command prompt. Either open up PyCharm and use the terminal window, or go to the terminal program in the Mac, or, like I said before, the command prompt window by typing in the search box CMD. And I can show you that here. Here's a Windows. I'll type CMD right here. We'll come up with the command prompt, and there it is. Now, whether we're on the command prompt or we're looking at the terminal window, we're really doing the same thing. This is the command line, and this is talking to the operating system directly. So in Windows, I would type dir and see a listing of files. It's the same type of program. Obviously, the output's going to be a little different because the operating systems each do things a bit differently from one another, but it's pretty much the same. Here in this terminal window, I'll do an ls, and we see those files here. So whether we're looking at this terminal window, or this terminal window, we're looking at the command prompt. Whether you're calling it command prompt or terminal window, it's really the same thing. What I wanted to point out is that most programs, when they want to signal output, when they want to show some, really deliver some output from the program, they write to standard out. So it's not just Python. And standard out, although it by default goes to the screen, can be redirected to a different place. And let me show you how that is done. Here I'm using ls again, and like I said, you can use dir on Windows. I'm now going to redirect ls to a different place. I'm going to go to out.txt. With the greater than sign, and this works exactly the same way on Windows, and a new file name, you will be writing to a file. And you can see with ls, if I write ls without anything else, you can see that the output goes to the screen. Now I'm going to say ls, and I'm going to go to this file using the greater than sign, and you see that no output goes to the screen. Why? Because the output for ls went to a file. This is an illustration of how when a program or a utility writes to standard out, that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to go to the screen. What it means is that we're feeding output to standard out, and then the operating system is being told what to do with it. If it's not told anything, it will go to the screen. If it is told what to do with it, then it may go to a file or some other place. We can do this on Windows as well. I'll just do dir, and I'll output to out.txt, and it works in exactly the same way. Now, how can I see what's in out.txt? I could open it. I could open it in PyCharm or whatever, but I can also show you at the command line how we might see the contents of a file even without even using an editor. We can just review the contents of a file using a program called cat. Now this will only work on Unix. I'll show you the Windows version. There's cat. Now you can see cat is showing us the output of the file. I could cat some other file as well. As you can see, here's my 03 standardout.py as being displayed by PyCharm. Why don't I cat that file? Now you can see there's the output of the file. There's the contents of the file, just as I wrote it in PyCharm, and I reviewed that file using cat. In Windows, it's similar. I use a utility called type, and type will show me the contents of a file. So any file that I want to look at, I can use the type command on Windows. And that just outputs the entire file to standard out, and that displays to the screen. Obviously, that means that if I wanted to copy a file in Windows, it would be, in the Mac or Windows, it'd be interesting enough. I can cat the file. So let's say I've got 03 standardout.txt. I could cat the file, and then I could redirect the output to, let's say, new.py. Now, if I look at new.py, I'll see that it also has the contents of the file. So when we're working at the command line, there are actually a great number of utilities and different techniques that we can use to manipulate files, copy them, take a look at them, search them. And that's an entirely different course. Part of this session, however, is just to alert you to what's possible at the command line. Another reason that I include it is because any good IT professional will have a certain facility at the command line. And I do want to say to you that if you're a Windows person, learning the Windows command line is extremely useful, especially if you're working within Windows. But that if you want to be a well-rounded IT professional, you should also get familiar with the Unix operating system. Now back to the idea of standard out, I want to once again show you that the output of our program goes to standard out. Thus, we can do the same redirection that we did with the other utility with our Python program. So here I am running O3 standard out, and I see hello and then world. I could go ahead and do that same thing and redirect it to a new file. I'll just use my out.txt again. That's going to overwrite out.txt. And if I look at out.txt, I see hello and world. So, and again, you can do the same thing with Windows. Just remember to use the type utility rather than the cat utility. So this is us writing to standard out and looking at a standard way that we can redirect output to a file if we wish. On that subject, I'd like to show you another way that we write to standard out. It's called Sis Dot Standard Out. Now, this should ring a bell with you based on what we did in the previous video when we wrote to a file. I don't know if you can remember offhand the function name that we used or the method name that we used to write to a file. I can show it to you right here. It was called write. This is a write method, and it is called on the file object. When we want to do this with standard out, we can write straight to standard out directly without using the print statement using sys standard out write. So I can go ahead and demo that right now. I'm gonna run this program without the now you can actually look very, very closely, without the redirection I meant to say. Look very closely at the output. Do you see hello world there? Question here though is, why don't we see any, why aren't they on separate lines if we're writing two separate writes? As we saw with hello and world. In fact, we can do these together. Why not? See hello and world together, and then hello world at the very end. Not only is there no new blank line between them, there's no new blank line between the end of our output and the prompt. This is the prompt, starting with David's MacBook Pro 2. This is the prompt. And so here's the question. Why didn't we drop down a line the way that print did? Well, you may remember from the previous video that if you wanted to see a blank line after your output with write, you would need to put it in specifically. We would need to do that same thing here. This means that what we have with sys standard out write is unadulterated output. That is, it's going to give us character by character output without adding anything. And that should make it clear to you then that print adds a new line character to every print statement that we make. This is something that we've probably never even reflected on because it just seems intuitive that every time you write to something, that every time you issue a print statement, that it should appear on its own line. But the fact is, this added new line character is implicit because it's just the default, what you would normally want to do. You would normally want to see every print statement on its own line. In fact, there are very few cases, very few situations where you wouldn't want to see each print statement on a separate line, although they do come up. You may just want to write something and then continue that line with the next print statement. Absolutely, you can do that. One of the ways to do that is with sys standard out write. Another way, by the way, and we haven't looked at this because it's sort of an extra thing, is that you can specify the ending of any print statement through an additional argument to print. Here you can see that I'm getting hello with an end of 0. There's that right there. Then you see world, but with a star at the end. Then you see the sys standard out write hello and the sys standard out write world. No new lines at all because this no longer adds a new line. This actually adds not a new line but a star. This means that there are a lot of possibilities. We could, for example, decide to add a star new line to the end of each of our print statements, and now we have, sort of specialized output. Whatever we'd really like to do, we can certainly do. The main point of the video, however, is to clue you into this special output stream called Sis Standard Out and show you ways that Python can write to Sis Standard Out. Now there's one last piece that I want to add here. I probably should have separated it into a separate video, and that is that the output going to Sis Standard Out can be redirected in another way as well. I'm going to show you that although, as we saw before, the default output for standard out is a file, and is the screen. And if we wish, we can redirect that output to a file. But we can also redirect it to another program, which is kind of interesting and is going to lead us to the next video. If I run this now, I'm going to see hello and world. Makes sense. I'm writing to standard out. But I might want to redirect the output of that program to another program. For this example, I'm going to use a utility that is not available on Windows. I'm sorry, you won't be able to demo it yourself. But what I do want to show you is the WC program. Now you know that the WC, you may have remembered the WC program from an assignment that we did several weeks ago in which we counted the number of words, letters, and lines in a file. WC counts the number of, I should say, lines, words, and characters in a file. One of the ways we can use WC is by piping output to WC. Once again, I'm going to run this program and you can see it's hello and world on 2 lines. I'm going to pipe this output to WC. Now this is another way that we can redirect standard out. Before, we were redirecting standard out to a file, and it wrote to that file. Here, we're redirecting standard out to another program. And as you see, we get 2, 2, and 12. I don't know if you remember this from the assignment, but the extra credit was to make your output look like WC's. WC issues output that shows number of lines, number of words, and number of characters. We could of course, vary that a little bit so that we see maybe some varying output. But you can see that whatever output comes out of our Python program being piped to WC, WC is taking that as input and it is showing us the number of lines, words, and characters in that output. And in our next video, we'll look at reading from standard in from within our Python program.